see you. You are 11 years old, but I don't think you are 11 years old. So that's.
I am actually 9. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, 9 years old.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to correct me. So 9 years old. So I don't think you are 9 years old. You are a professor, and I'm going to ask you as a professor, and you will answer that thing. What do you think about Bangladesh, and what do you know about Bangladesh?
So touched by the great history of Bangladesh, Mughals and the British, to the 1905 partition that led to the reunification, and that led to a split in India, which led to Pakistan and India being created, and then the racism that the early Pakistanis exhibited, not allowing Bengalis to exercise their own language, etc. And so it was a really touching experience, learning about the 1971 uprising. And I am so honored to say that my parents came from the same nation of Bangabandhu, or Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, a truly inspiring and great leader.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's a great.
Such a wonderful story and history you share with us. Thank you. Go ahead, Huda bhai.
You know that in America, in our country, there is a black and white color problem, and that's a discrimination, racism is still there, and how we can overcome and bring a peace in our country regarding this.
I mean, the key is disregarding the pigment in our skin and our heritage and where we come from. I might be a Bangladeshi American, but that doesn't really matter. I might be a Muslim. That doesn't matter. And no matter who we are, we should all be treated equally. However, racism is when that doesn't happen. And there is honestly no reason for racism to exist. Racism is just people being selfish and thinking that they are better than others and using some justification. And so, at its core, we have to attack the root and not the branches. We have to attack the root, and that is selfishness. Racism is a way of justification for selfishness, such as scientific racism. Racism is just a way to believe you are better than others because of some physical characteristic or heritage characteristic that they have, which they cannot pick. They cannot pick their genetics. They cannot pick where they came from, at least not as of now. And so that is why racism still exists, because people are being selfish and trying to imagine themselves as better than others. And so racism is just a form, I believe, of justification for thinking that you are better than others because of their heritage, because of their physical appearance, because of where they came from, because of what they think, stuff like that. It's just a way at its core to justify being selfish. And so I think we need to cut it off at the root. We need to stop that selfishness at the core.
How is possible to do that in our country?
Well, selfishness is a very arbitrary thing, I would say. And it's very hard to eliminate selfishness. So hard that many people have not tried to do it before. And there are many people who have tried to do things like democracy. They have tried to do things like empires. They have tried to segregate, make this problem of racism deeper. And they have tried to perform equity. But on a level, it's not just government enforcing this. It's also people regularly doing this. Because back in the 1950s and 60s, the government was really hostile towards Black people, especially Southern governments. And back in the Reconstruction era, right after the Civil War, the South was even more inhospitable to Blacks. You would get treated very badly if you were Black. And even still, around the 1900s and the 1950s, especially in the Plessy versus Ferguson case in Louisiana, segregation was justified by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was constitutional. And so, however, the government, after passing the 13th Amendment, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, completely disconnected themselves from trying to discriminate Black and white people. At least partially disconnected themselves. But still, we see racism crawling here and there every day, not just with Blacks and whites, but also with Asians too. Well, recently, there was this wave of Asian hate just a few months ago. And so it's not just Blacks and whites, but also Asians, Hispanics, other minorities in that area. And so racism pops up everywhere. And even when people of power stop doing it, we, in our everyday sense, keep doing it. And that because for an example, America's government detached itself from that sort of racism, at least legally and officially, a long time ago. But still, we see racism teeming here and there. And especially on smaller courts on the level of smaller jurisdictions or smaller titles, and sometimes we everyday people exhibit that sort of racism towards others, and so we fundamentally have to stop this.
Thank you.
So that is my answer. We are the people who are enforcing it as well. It's not just the governments and the big stuff. It's also the small It's also the people who hold small amounts of power in small jurisdictions, and even regular, ordinary people who exhibit that kind of racism.
Over 75 years, there is a conflict with Israel and Palestinian, and how it can possible to bring the peace of that regime, and what is your empathy for that?
Well, the Israel-Palestine conflict goes back a long way. In fact, if I become president in 2048, I plan to stop the Israel versus Palestine conflict. And so the Israel versus Palestine conflict all started because of the meddling British. Colonialism, even though it was long gone, just like racism, still leaves its mark on the world through ordinary people carrying it on. Colonialism had left a mark on its own, especially in the squabble between India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, lots of countries in Africa over small pieces of land that don't really matter in terms of resources, and especially the Israel versus Palestine conflict, where thousands have died, is one of the direct results of that colonialism. Because I feel that both sides are at fault here. Palestinians are not accepting Israel because Israel was the first, since Israel, with the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, were the first to arrive there, even before Islam was created. They have a right to keep some of their land, and they have a right to keep it legally, because it was their holy land and they believed in it back then. So it just causes more religious squabbling and more death if you try to argue, because ultimately what we believe should not affect what we think about geopolitics or things in that matter. What we believe should not affect that. However, for things like Israel and Palestine, it does. And even though Israel has offered lots and lots of things for Palestine just to recognize its right to the land, Palestine keeps saying no. And I feel that the primary cause is the squabble between religion. And that is I feel like those are the two roots. Colonialism, which started this conflict, and religion, which is the thing that keeps it going. I mean, it's just what we believe about the universe and ourselves because of that lack of knowledge, of that lack of information. And humans are really not comfortable with the lack of information. And so I feel that religions are a way to cope with that. And so it shouldn't be affecting our current geopolitical or land or conflicts. And even racism sometimes stems from religion as well, because it is a part of your cultural heritage and sometimes even where you come from. And so this squabble between religion is mainly the thing that is keeping it going, because Palestine believes it has all right to the land under a sort of misinterpretation. I have absolutely nothing against the Palestinian people, especially the poor Palestinian refugees who have to flee to other inhospitable lands like Saudi Arabia or Syria in order to find their only refuge. However, people running the government, like Hamas and other terrorist groups, are recruiting people for this cause because of a misinterpretation of information. And this not only causes people to think wrongly about the entire thing and about the entire religion and the entire population, which is mainly where Islamophobia stems from, but it also kills many people unnecessarily in the process for a misinterpretation that isn't even true. And so I feel that this violent misinterpretation of Islam, when all that the Quran asks for is peace and equality between men and women, it is quite ironic to see people misinterpreting it or interpreting it in such a way that they can fulfill their own dreams or dictatorial desires. And so it's really just a bending of the reality of religion that is causing this conflict. I feel like it's a misinterpretation of the religion that's not only causing this conflict, but conflicts such as the conflict in Afghanistan, Syria, and many others.
Well, you explained that things when you will be president, you will solve this problem. I don't know how you're going to solve this problem.
I appreciate this thing. Like, at least from his place, he's try to say he will solve it, and he has a dream and he has a passion and he has an idea to solve it. I like to thank you his attitude and the way he speaks. That is really great. It's like a sometimes I'm thinking he's talking like a Nelson Mandela or other leader, like the global leader who can solve the political.
He is our leader, for future leader. But you said that your religion is Islam, and you talk about a few good things about Islam, the equality and peace. But in Western world, this Islam, some people explain this. It's like a terrorist people. So, what do you say about that things that and how we can recover that things to bring that original peace is Islam?
Well, as I mentioned, Islamophobia largely stems from these people misinterpreting the religion. Not only the people misinterpreting the religion, and making bad things about it, like Shia law, for example, or misinterpretations like women should be kept at home or stuff like that. They are just bending this religion to conform to their own desires. And many people who sadly misinterpret this is this bending as the normal view that all believers in Islam have. And because most of the time, what gets on the news is not peace or love in the world. What gets on the news is war and conflict. And so it brings more attention to many people in the Western world when they see war and conflict being associated to Islam, and when they see love and peace. Most oftentimes, when they see love and peace associated to anything, they don't give a frick. And so that is why many people think that Islamophobia is justified. They take many bended views of reality and think that it is its own thing. They take a bended version of reality and think that it is the main view that all people have, because what the actual main view that people have is not getting on the news, is not getting on TV, is not catching the attention of other people. And thus, people are left to think that these ideologies, these twisted ideologies, since they catch more attention, are the real things. And it's not, and I feel it's not just the people who misinterpret Islam at the core of this, but also the people who have the fault of thinking that a few terrorist group or a few outbursts or a few outgrowths represent the entirety of Islam. I feel that is also people like those are also at fault for doing things such as that, for believing in Islamophobia, because it is really just thinking that because some groups have this twisted interpretation of reality, all of the groups have some twisted interpretation of reality. And so that is why I think Islamophobia comes from. There have been many horrible acts that catch the news. For example, today before I took a nap, I read this article about a 55-year-old man who bought a 9-year-old daughter from a poor family because they were starving and they couldn't afford anything. And so those kind of horrible conditions and those kind of horrible things that happen, and this was in Afghanistan, mind you, after months after the Taliban took the capital. This is what is happening in Afghanistan. Many are poor, women are kept at home, stuff like that. And so in these kinds of conditions, people imagine these kinds of conditions as what is happening to the whole world of Islam. And that is a misconception that is highly at fault, and not just used with the Islamic race, but and then not only used with the Islamic religion, but also many races. And so that is, I feel, the stem of Islamophobia. Both people misinterpreting it, and also both people misinterpreting Islam, and people who think that those people misinterpreting Islam represent all of Islam. That is at the root of Islamophobia.
Great.